The tension in the room doesn't just settle, it thickens, tightens, pulls at every breath as Donald Trump leans forward over the polished wood desk, one hand gesturing lazily as the other steadies his posture like a lion preparing to pounce. And with a slow, practiced sneer that he's used to silence reporters, generals, and governors alike, he spits out the line, not even shouted, just low enough to slide like oil across the stage. "Tell me, Jasmine, did your father teach? You that slick mouth of yours?" And it's the kind of sentence designed to sting, not just with arrogance, but with surgical cruelty. The kind that wraps itself in a joke, but lands like a slap, and a few chuckles echo around the room, half-hearted, uncomfortable. The kind of laughter that betrays weakness, not amusement, while others glance nervously toward the moderator, unsure if this just crossed a line, or if the line was even real anymore in a country where political theater often veers into psychological warfare. But Jasmine Crockett doesn't react, at least not in the way Trump expects. She doesn't flinch, doesn't laugh, doesn't scold. She just stares, her expression carved from granite, still and unreadable. But in her eyes, God, in her eyes, you can see it. The ignition of something deeper than anger, older than politics. Something forged in the long shadow of legacy, injustice, and unspoken promises made to fathers who sacrificed too much for daughters who now carry the weight of proving it mattered. She sees him, not just the man seated across from her, bloated with ego and calculation, but every man like him who has ever dismissed a woman with a sentence, who has ever tried to reduce her resistance to attitude, her conviction to theatrics, her pain to performance. And she knows in that instant that Trump thinks this was clever, thinks this was dominance, thinks he's in control. And he couldn't be more wrong. Because Jasmine Crockett isn't made of sound bites or slogans, she is made of moments like this. Of cold air, tight throats, and the slow churn of righteous fury wrapped in memory, of standing in kitchens with her father as he cleaned grease, off his hands after building homes all day, of watching him zip up his National Guard uniform with quiet pride, of sitting on the porch with him on Juneteenth as he told her stories he never dared speak outside their neighborhood, about the march in Selma when he was only 17, when he saw a man collapse from a baton strike to the skull and thought, "That could have been me," about how he cried when Dr. King was shot and then joined a local food drive the next day because grief was only useful if it fed someone. And Jasmine remembers it all now, as clearly as if it happened 10 minutes ago. Because when Trump mentions her father's name, it isn't just an insult. It's an invitation to war. A war she didn't start but has prepared her entire life to finish. And while Trump smirks, still expecting her to hurl back a clever jab or stumble into rage, she remains frozen, but not with fear. She's calculating, counting backward from 10 like her father taught her the first time she came home crying. From school because someone called her too loud or too smart for a girl like you. And he crouched beside her and said, "Baby girl, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy." And Jasmine breathes once, slow and deliberate, and in that breath is history, is trauma, is resilience that cannot be mocked away by a billionaire's cruelty. And the room, sensing the shift, goes silent again. Not out of reverence for Trump, but out of instinct, because everyone knows when something bigger than politics just entered the conversation, something that can't be fact-checked or filibustered, something ancient and ancestral and too heavy to measure in poll numbers. And as Trump leans back smugly, unaware that he's already lost the battle he just started, Jasmine lowers her eyes to the desk for a brief second. Not out of shame, but out of prayer, channeling every memory of her father, the way he would sit quietly during church, but hum under his breath during the hymns, the way he taught her to change a tire before she was old enough to drive, the way he told her that justice isn't just something you fight for, it's something you carry every day, even when your voice shakes, even when your hands bleed, even when the world forgets you exist until you remind them. And she looks up again, and the storm that Trump thought he triggered is now fully visible, quiet, controlled, and deadly, because Jasmine Crockett is no longer playing defense. She is loading the cannon, assembling the archive, preparing to expose not just a man, but the entire lie he's built his myth upon. And though no one speaks, no one needs to, because the tension now has a shape, a color, a pulse. And it belongs to her. And what Trump doesn't know, what he'll realize too late, is that the words he threw so carelessly across the table didn't strike a nerve. They opened a door, and behind that door is every receipt, every sealed record, every photograph buried in tabloid silence, and every name whispered in lawsuits never meant to surface, and Jasmine, the daughter he underestimated, the black woman he thought could be embarrassed into silence, is standing at that door with both hands on the handle, and she's not stepping back. She's kicking it off the damn hinges. It was never meant to be a showdown, never supposed to turn into the kind of moment that would rattle the glass on TV studio windows or send shockwaves through Capitol Hill whisper networks before the lights even cooled. No, it was billed as a town hall conversation on criminal justice reform, a polished bipartisan media event held in a wood-paneled Washington, D.C. studio where senators, governors, and activists sat in pre-assigned seats with rehearsed sound bites and practiced smiles, and Jasmine Crockett, the freshman firebrand from Texas, was there not for spectacle, but for truth, for the statistics, the stories, the fathers and sons, and mothers whose lives were broken by policies signed with champagne pens behind bulletproof glass. And for the first 20 minutes, it stayed just polite enough to be dangerous. Applause lines, thin empathy, vague commitments wrapped in political theater, until Donald Trump, who was never supposed to attend but arrived last minute with cameras in tow and ego in full bloom, sat down uninvited and began unraveling the room like a slow spill of gasoline under the heat of studio lights, and suddenly everything shifted. He didn't shout at first. He didn't need to. He smirked, leaned back, laced his fingers over his belly, and waited for someone to say something he could turn into a punchline. And Jasmine, seated 3 spots to his left, never gave him one. Not because she was afraid, but because she was watching, studying, reading the room like an open wound. And that silence, that grace, unnerved him more than shouting ever could, so he started jabbing, poking at her background, interrupting. When she cited incarceration data, scoffing when she referenced housing discrimination as a ripple effect of 1990s policy, dismissing her father as probably some old union guy, and tossing out woke like confetti at every word he couldn't pronounce, and the audience, oh, the audience, composed of a curated mix of think tank interns, political donors, and local business owners, was split between fascination and fear, laughing when it felt safe, murmuring when it didn't, their eyes darting between the moderators and the teleprompter crew like people watching a dam start to crack, because something was off, something colder and more personal than mere politics. Jasmine sat there, hands folded, jaw locked, each insult landing like a raindrop on steel, and inside her chest a fire built, not wild, but controlled, contained, fueled not by vanity but by legacy, because this wasn't the first time her father had been dismissed by a white man in a tailored suit, and it damn sure wasn't the first time his sacrifice had been ignored. Robert Crockett wasn't a headline. He was a builder, a marcher, a soldier, a father who never made excuses, even when the world gave him every reason to. And Jasmine carried that memory like armor under her blazer, not flaunted but present, humming through her bones, because she had grown up watching that man pick up bricks for neighbors who couldn't afford to pay him, watching him stand silent at family funerals for men shot by police, watching him fix the church door every time. Someone smashed it, never angry, just resolved, and when she became a lawyer, then a representative. He never bragged, never even asked for a photo in her office because the work wasn't about recognition. It was about service. And she knew in her blood that Trump mocking him wasn't just ignorance. It was spiritual, Violence, the kind that dismisses lineage, erases names, and turns generations of struggle into a joke. And that wasn't something she could answer with a clever line. It required patience, precision, and silence sharp enough to make the walls themselves listen. And so she let him talk. Let him hang himself with every chuckle, every sideways glance to the audience when he said, "Maybe her dad didn't teach her about manners." As if that was clever. As if that wouldn't burn a hole through the room. When the truth came, and in those moments the silence around her became sacred, a stillness that roared louder than any microphone, because everyone who had ever underestimated a woman like Jasmine knew what was coming, could feel the slow rumble beneath the floorboards, the tightening of her shoulders, the way her eyes never left him even as he tried to dismiss her with shrugs and smirks. And while the producers backstage scrambled to cut to commercial, sensing something unhinged about the way Trump was digging in, violating decorum with surgical glee, Jasmine remained still, remembering her father's stories about Selma, about the night he came home with torn skin and a cracked rib and still showed up for work the next morning at the construction site, because dignity wasn't just marching, it was survival. And remembering how he had once told her, "They won't. Fight fair, Jazz. But that don't mean you can't win, and win to her." Wasn't about applause or viral moments. It was about truth that cuts clean and leaves no room for retreat. And so she waited, every breath measured, every nerve alert, because she knew that when the moment came, and it would, it had to be surgical, undeniable, unforgettable. And Trump, so drunk on his own reflexes, didn't see it. He thought he was still controlling the room, still the heavyweight slinging insults with impunity. But the audience was no longer laughing. The moderator was shifting awkwardly in his seat, and a man in the second row had stopped recording on his phone. Not because he was bored, but because he could feel the air changing like static before a storm. And Jasmine, still stone-faced, thought of her father in his garden, his boots covered in dirt, smiling at her college diploma like it was a blueprint for a house he never got to build. And she thought of how that smile had disappeared when she told him about the death threats after her first election, and how he had simply nodded and said, "Then you're doing something right." And that was all she needed to remember that. She was not here to be liked, not here to be applauded. She was here to make truth undeniable, and Trump had just given her the runway to do it. Had made the fatal mistake of confusing calm with weakness, of thinking her silence was surrender instead of strategy, and while the crowd watched, frozen in the kind of quiet that only happens. Right before glass breaks, Jasmine adjusted her posture, reached slowly into her binder, and prepared, not to argue, but to reveal, because when the time came to speak, it wouldn't be about clapping back or one-liners. It would be about exposing the entire lie, brick by brick, and proving to every person watching that her father had raised a woman not to win debates, but to dismantle empires built on mockery, cruelty, and cowardice, disguised as power. And as the final insult left Trump's mouth like a careless match tossed into dry brush, Jasmine simply inhaled, eyes unblinking, mouth calm, and knew the storm was now hers to control. 7 minutes pass like a lifetime in the studio, and though no one speaks, the silence becomes a sound of its own, heavy, expectant, sacred. Jasmine Crockett sits with her spine straight, eyes locked ahead, every second of Trump's smirking, confidence feeding the precision of her fury, the kind of fury that doesn't erupt but sharpens. Her fingers rest lightly on a manila folder in front of her, and when she finally clears her throat, the mic picks it up like thunder. The moderator looks up. The audience leans in. Trump shifts in his chair almost lazily, unaware that he is seconds away from being blindsided by a truth he never believed anyone would dare to say aloud. Jasmine speaks, calm and deliberate. "You want to talk about fathers?" she begins, voice low and without ornament. Her tone is not aggressive, but surgical. Mine built communities, yours built lies. A gasp breaks the tension. Trump's jaw stiffens, his eyebrows twitch, but Jasmine doesn't stop. She places the folder gently on the table, opens it with the care of a woman exhuming buried bones. "This is a birth certificate," she says, sliding a document toward the center. "From 1982, belonging to a child your father, Fred Trump, secretly paid to hide, a child born to a housemaid who disappeared a year later." The air leaves the room. Audible shock ripples through the audience. For a split second, even the cameras seem to freeze. Trump opens his mouth to interrupt, but Jasmine raises her hand without looking at him, a subtle, elegant gesture of command that silences even him. "This isn't rumor," she continues. "This is legal documentation, hidden by non-disclosure agreements and offshore transfers. I have sealed court testimonies, redacted financial records, and witness statements." She lifts more pages, one by one, as if unveiling an indictment written by history itself. Her voice doesn't rise, doesn't waver. It cuts, methodical and merciless. "You and your family didn't just bury mistakes. You buried people. Paid them to vanish, paid others to forget. You turned shame into inheritance." She reads quotes from sealed settlements, words from women silenced by fear, their pain reduced to transactions. Each one hits like a nail in a coffin. "Your bankruptcies, your lawsuits, your hush payments, we all knew about those. But this was the line. You mocked my father to humiliate me, to draw blood. But all you did was give me permission to tell the truth." Her eyes meet his now, unwavering, a stare forged in every courtroom she ever stood in, every lie she ever dismantled. "Don't ever speak my father's name again. You haven't earned that right." Trump, who has insulted heads of state, judges, war heroes, and grieving families without blinking, sits frozen. His tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. His eyes dart to the folder, to the moderator, to the silent crowd. But no one saves him. There is no spin, no snide remark that can put the truth back in its cage. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett isn't just a congresswoman. She is every daughter whose father was diminished, every voice told to sit down, every truth suffocated under money and power. She has not raised her voice. She has not made a scene. But she has burned a legacy to the ground. And as the camera pans across the stunned audience, some in tears, some simply staring, jaws slack, the silence says what no headline ever could. The myth of invincibility has been shattered, and the reckoning is no longer knocking. It is here. Trump's face changes, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, as if his body is struggling to decide whether it should deny the moment or submit to it. And in that hesitation, everything collapses. His jaw, once rigid with condescension, now slackens. His shoulders, puffed with practiced arrogance, begin to dip. The smirk that had curled at the edge of his lips dissolves into a confused, twisted grimace. The silence in the room is louder than any riot. It wraps around everyone like a cold wind, stilling even the bravest among them. The moderator doesn't blink. Camera operators hold their breath. The audience, once a sea of shifting postures and whispered exchanges, has turned to stone. Jasmine Crockett, in the eye of it all, stands taller than she ever has, not just physically, but in essence. Her voice no longer just a tool for rhetoric, but a weapon of lineage, forged in the fire. Of every injustice her family survived, she does not gloat, she does not rush. Her voice softens now, not with pity, but with purpose. It is the sound of a truth finally released from the weight of waiting. "Men like my father," she begins, her tone wrapped in reverence, "built this country with their hands." And as the words echo through the mic, they travel beyond the walls of the studio, past the reach of the cameras, into the streets and homes of people watching. People remembering their own fathers, their own grandfathers, whose calloused hands paved sidewalks they were never allowed to walk freely, who fought wars abroad only to return to battles at home, who were told their names weren't worth remembering. Men like yours, she says, and her voice does not tremble, hid behind walls of privilege. The contrast is not a metaphor. It is a ledger. It is a record. It is an unpayable debt laid bare for a nation built on IOUs of humanity. And when she turns her gaze, slow, deliberate, to the camera, to the millions watching, something ancient and electric pierces the lens. This isn't just about politics, she says. It's about what we honor, truth or legacy, courage or cowardice. In that instant, there is no doubt about who she means, no confusion about which side of the line each person now stands. And Trump, the titan of insult, the emperor of deflection, the man who has built entire arenas of applause from cruelty, cannot speak. His lips twitch as if searching for a sentence, a jab, a denial. Nothing comes, because there is no lie strong enough to stand against the truth she has just told, no curtain wide enough to hide the shame she has uncovered. His eyes fall to the table, his fingers tighten on the arms of his chair. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he looks small, mortal, defeated not by policy but by character. And the audience sees it, the producers see it, the world sees it. Jasmine Crockett doesn't need applause. She doesn't need validation. Her victory is not theatrical, it is spiritual. It is the sight of justice standing in its full height, asking nothing but to be witnessed. And so she lets the silence carry it. Lets the truth live there, suspended, undeniable. In that moment, she is no longer speaking for herself. She is speaking for every daughter who watched their father be erased by history, for every child told. That power is louder than principle, for every truth buried under the weight of wealth. And as Trump lowers his gaze, no one dares fill the silence, because everyone knows this is what reckoning looks like. Not fury, but clarity. Not volume, but presence. Jasmine Crockett has brought a giant to his knees, not with vengeance, but with verification. And the silence that follows is not empty. It is full of every story that now dares to rise in her wake. When the broadcast ends, it does not end quietly. It detonates across the internet, across group chats and newsrooms and kitchen tables, across the hollow echo chambers that had once dismissed voices like Jasmine Crockett's as noise or novelty. And in mere minutes, the clip of her calm dismantling of a dynasty becomes more than viral. It becomes historical, etched into digital timelines and shared like scripture among generations who never thought they'd see justice speak with such poise, such fire, such truth. But Jasmine doesn't stay to watch it burn. She doesn't linger for applause or bask in the seismic shift her words have caused, because for her, the moment was never about spectacle. It was about release, about giving shape and sound to the weight her family had carried for decades. And as she steps out of the building into the thick Washington air, her phone buzzing nonstop in her blazer pocket, she doesn't look back, doesn't wave to reporters shouting her name, doesn't smile for the cameras trying to capture a woman at the height of victory, because in her bones she knows that this isn't the top, it's the threshold. She walks with a silence that is not retreat, but reverence. Each step a memory of her father's old boots on gravel, his steady rhythm on protest marches, his low humming as he worked with tired hands to build dignity where the world had offered none. And somewhere, hours later, in a small house 3 states away, that same man sits in a faded recliner, watching the replay not on a smart TV, but on a second-hand tablet his granddaughter taught him to use, and he watches with eyes wide and wet, the same eyes that once saw crosses burn in the distance and kept looking forward anyway, and as he sees Jasmine lift that folder, sees her, call the truth by name. He doesn't cry from sorrow, but from the sacred knowing that the seed he planted in her soul has bloomed publicly and without apology in front of the whole world. Meanwhile, across the country, people begin to speak, not pundits or politicians, but ordinary people. A retired nurse in Atlanta writes a Facebook post about her father being fired for demanding equal pay in 1978. A woman in Oakland records a video talking about the last time she saw her dad walk away from a police precinct after being arrested for protesting school segregation, and a young man in Chicago tweets a photo of his father's work boots with the caption, "He didn't die for nothing. She proved that, and slowly, surely, the name Crockett becomes more than a trending topic. It becomes a touchstone, a symbol, not of a perfect family, but of a public reckoning long overdue. Even in schools, teachers pause their lessons to replay the speech, letting students absorb not just the facts, but the tone, the composure, the example of a woman who didn't rise by shouting, but by standing firm in what she knew, and in newsrooms. Once allergic to accountability, editors who had long played it safe now find themselves rewriting op-eds, wondering how they missed what was always there, how they underestimated the daughter of a man they never bothered to research. And in the private halls of power, the backlash begins, of course. Fundraising emails are drafted calling Jasmine radical, dangerous, divisive, and the old machine sputters to life to protect its own. But even that feels weaker now, almost desperate. Like a dam trying to plug a flood with sandbags made of excuses because the clip won't go away. The truth won't be unwrung, and the public, regardless of side, saw something that cannot be unseen. The fall of arrogance and the rise of integrity. And in that seeing, something shifts permanently. Even Trump's most loyal followers are left shaken, not because they suddenly disown him, but because they've witnessed his silence, his stillness, the absence of his usual venom, a man exposed not by scandal, but by fact, by lineage, by a woman who refused to lower herself to his level and instead rose so far above it that he couldn't reach her, couldn't diminish her, and perhaps most importantly, couldn't stop her. Jasmine returns home that night to her quiet apartment, drops her keys on the table, and stands in the doorway for a moment, staring at nothing and everything, at the weight she still feels in her shoulders and the warmth in her chest. And she lets herself exhale, a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding since the day her father first told her, "Speak when it matters and let the silence do the rest." And now, the silence is doing its work. Across living rooms, courtrooms, classrooms, campaign offices, dinner tables, the silence of a world hearing something real for the first time in too long. And while pundits argue about what comes next, while consultants scramble to predict polling impacts and senators draft response statements, somewhere, an 11-year-old girl sits cross-legged on a couch, watching the clip with wide eyes, not just hearing Jasmine's words, but feeling them, absorbing them, letting them seep into her bones. And in her small chest, something stirs. Not ambition, not rage, but possibility. And that is how legacy works. Not by shouting, not by dominating, but by passing truth down through time like a flame in careful hands. And in the end, Jasmine. Crockett doesn't change the world with fire, but with light. And the world, for once, does not look away.